There may have been a lot of concerns heading into UFC 228 fight week, but the fight game is an unpredictable beast. And in the end, what we're left with is one damn good fight and one less UFC champion. Hello and welcome. My name is Shaun Al-Shatti, and this is the UFC 228 preview show. I am joined today by my good friend, the best writer in the game. You know him as the man in the hat, Mr. Chuck Mindenhall, and we are inside of the American Airlines Center here in Dallas, Texas. There is a hurricane going on outside, so we are in lockdown mode in this arena. And breaking news really coming down the pipe right now. Nicco Montaño, the reigning UFC, or maybe not reigning anymore, the UFC women's flyweight champion, has been stripped of her title, according to Dana White. Nicco was hospitalized this morning, Friday morning, while cutting weight. Her fight with Valentina Shevchenko was ultimately canceled, and now, just hours later, we find out that she has been stripped of the title. Valentina Shevchenko will be booked into a fight at a later date for that title against an opponent yet to be named. So just, Chuck, first off, what are your immediate reactions? What are your immediate reactions when you hear this?
Well, I mean, this storm came on suddenly, and so did we learn of this news that all of a sudden Montaño is no longer the champion. I think there was a little bit of a concern that there may be some consequences for this, depending on what was going on. Now, hearing somebody that was hospitalized with a problem, you're not going to infer that she's faking it. You're not going to make inferences.
Nicco certainly inferred that. Or I'm sorry,
yes,
Valentina certainly inferred that.
So, you know, then maybe she has more information than the rest of us do. Maybe Dana White has had private conversations with her and her management team. But ultimately, it's just it's one of those very, very weird and rash decisions that the UFC makes, and you like sometimes for them to maybe sleep on a little bit rather than try to address it in such a quick fashion. I know that Nicco won that title, the inaugural belt, 9 months ago in December.
Yeah.
If it was over a year and we hadn't seen her fight, and there was just a series of, and I know there's been some kookiness trying to get her booked, but if there had been a real documented series of events that had led to us to believe that maybe it wasn't all on the up and up, maybe you take that action. But right now, we don't have the information personally, and it just seems a little rash to me, to do that. What's really funny is we were talking to Valentina. She did a little scrum right beforehand, and 1 minute she's telling us, what's going on and what should be done, what she'd like to be done, and then 5 minutes later we hear that, Nicco's stripped. So everything's a little disjointed right now. It's all just coming in, but it feels a little rushed. I don't feel like they had to do it that quickly.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I guess my general question coming into this, I mean, this was a card with two title fights. I don't think anybody was coming into this card really coming for the co-main event, Nicco versus Valentina. It was a little bonus on the card, a little extra. But now that it's gone, does it take away from the card? Do you feel like the overall card has been affected in terms of it?
This was we always talk about a co-feature, a co-main event being kind of a funny term, because in most cases there's a title fight at the top and then there's a bunch of decent attraction fight. Well, this was actually a title fight, so you could actually call this a co-main event, regardless on what level of magnitude you want to place it. It was a title fight. It does lose something. I think it was loosely tied at the hip with the other one to kind of bring in extra attraction and having that poster say two different title fights going on. Now, having said all of that, this is just a psychological thing for, I don't think it matters to casuals in the slightest. I think that diehards who want to pay attention to what's going on in the division, they may tune in just for the depth of the card, but ultimately, I think most people were concerned about Darren Till making the weight, what was going to happen with that fight with Tyron Woodley, and that fight is still on. I think the same number of people are going to tune in that would have before.
Yeah, you mentioned Darren Till. Let's talk about this main event, because it is still on, and that was really the big story coming into this week. Was Darren Till going to make weight? And so let's start at the beginning. I mean, when the UFC booked this fight, obviously Colby Covington is currently the interim welterweight champion. It seems like we forget that. He is, at least until tomorrow. When this fight starts, he will be stripped of this title. Tony Ferguson style.
Going out here
Lots of title stripping going on in Dallas. So, Chuck, I mean, when this fight was booked, there were a lot of questions being asked, a lot of concerns being raised, a lot of hand-wringing, really, about whether this was the right call. Darren Till obviously has weight issues. He had missed weight for his last fight against Stephen Thompson. ends up being much ado about nothing. He ends up weighing in at 169 pounds. He even gets that little extra this morning, flips the double birds. He does what he needs to do. So now, in retrospect, knowing what you know now, did the UFC make the right call going with Darren Till for this fight?
I think so, man. I mean, it is very complicated. And when these divisions get this tied up at the top, where there's guys with equal things, when they start handing out interim titles and they start stripping these I mean, it just gets too complicated. It really does. It's not an accessible sport for people who just want to know a little bit about mixed martial arts. This is one of those situations where you just kind of like, listen, if this was the best way to simplify things and to get things rolling again, and we know that Colby Covington is out there, for the winner, something like this, let's do it. I'm over it. I just want to see this fight. It's not like Darren Till did not have the merit to get this fight. I think that he's a great challenge to Woodley. I think he was kind of the 1A, 1B. You were kind of splitting hairs basically to figure out who deserved it more. I think that being around this, and obviously in retrospect, leading as a context into what's going on here, seeing the reception he's got, some of the media that's over here, and there's some excitement in there, and I think it's all kind of more based around Darren Till, and I just given all of that, I'm pretty happy that that's the fight right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at Tyron Woodley's title reign, he is the third longest reigning champion in the UFC right now, but he has faced a very particular type of opponent. He's faced a lot of specialists. Stephen Thompson, karate style specialist, Damian Maia, pure grappler, really in the way that we don't see anymore in today's game. Darren Till, on the other hand, he brings a different element into this fight. He feels like a more all-around fighter, but he also just brings elements that Tyron really hasn't faced. He is massive for the division. I mean, that goes without
100%.
saying. Lanky,
That's
very
why we
tall.
were worried, right? Like,
yeah.
Is he going to get down?
He's lanky, very tall. His striking is excellent. His counter-striking is excellent. His distance management is tremendous. When you look at Tyron's, again, title reign and the type of opponent he's faced, do you feel like Darren Till, his overall skill set, presents the toughest challenge so far that Tyron has had to defend this title against?
Probably, but I could say more definitively that he's probably the hungriest fighter that has gone into this situation. The guy's 25 years old. He fights for his country, but he's fighting for Liverpool, and I think that those things, they do matter. They do matter when you're trying to control emotion and you're trying to pack it in, your motivations and everything that go into entering that cage, man. I think he has a lot of strange intangibles that way that you have to look at. At the same time, mentioning what you said, he is very large, man.
He's huge.
You mentioned earlier, we were talking during the actual weigh-ins, what happens if he gets on his back? I think that really is the most intriguing. That's the most dangerous prospect for him, and maybe the most intriguing, because if he gets taken down, Tyron Woodley pulls out a singlet again, becomes the wrestler. Could be a long night for him if he just doesn't have an answer for that. And I think that that's really one of the big intrigues. It always is when a guy is that good of a wrestler. I think that that's always a big intrigue. But I will say this for Darren Till: he's an opportunist, and I think he's going to go for broke a little bit in this fight if he has to. And I think that knowing that. Shoot at your own risk in those situations, because he is a legitimate striker. He's got legitimate power, and he's a young guy, man, and he's been working on his cardio and everything else. So he's gonna present some problems for Tyrone.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about Darren Till. The support he receives, even here in the United States, is pretty large. Even out in that arena for weigh-ins, he was the crowd favorite. He was the one people were very clearly going for.
Tyron Woodley, man. He comes out tonight as a boober. Like he can't go anywhere without getting booed.
Man, and that's what I want to ask you. I mean, Tyron Woodley at this point, it's clear to us. I mean, whenever you write about him on MMA Fighting, a lot of negativity often comes back. When you tweet about him, a lot of negativity often comes back. His last two title fights probably didn't do him a lot of favors in that regard. They weren't, action-packed. But in the same vein, Darren Till, he's not long for this division. He's already said that it's inevitable he goes to middleweight. His perfect scenario is really he gets this title on Saturday, wins one more, and then goes up to 85, regardless if he vacates the title or not. But I'm curious for your thoughts. I mean, you've been here, you've seen the atmosphere around Darren Till. You've seen the metrics. I mean, he's doing the most views regardless of anything for our site. People obviously want to see him. Does he have that ick factor to you? Do you feel if he has a successful weekend this week, is he the kind of star the UFC's been looking for?
I'll tell you what, he certainly has. He's been a breath of fresh air. If nothing else, it's very difficult to gauge that it factor. There's so much that goes into it, and every time it's like one of those things you try to put your finger on and then it slips over somewhere else. He certainly has a lot of components. I think he's a very magnetic personality, man. I mean, you talk to him, he's very sincere. I think he tells the media what's on his mind. He's not afraid to insult people. which I think is one of those things that you should
yeah.
have. I mean, you look at the best guys. Conor McGregor was not afraid to insult people. Neither was Ronda Rousey. They were not afraid to have to step on, things that they thought were wrong in the game or whatever. They were very big picture, and I think he's got that a little. He's got a little bit of that. And now how does that parlay into everything? I think the biggest thing for him, and this is what the easiest is for some guys, is to go in there and win, but they don't have the it factor outside of it. I think he may have the it factor. We need to see him go beat somebody like Tyron Woodley and get that belt, and then we'll really know. But I think one big showing in this card, in this setting, I think we might see him translate fairly well. And you're right, man. The traffic is he's always I know that too. Every time you mention his name, there's a lot of hoopla, a lot of fanfare around him. So I think he just needs to marry that up with a really good performance against Woodley, and we'll see from there, man.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned the wrestling. I think that's the overlooked question. So much has been made about the weight. We haven't even looked at really the stylistic matchup in the lead up to this. That wrestling game. I mean, Darren Till. There are so many power wrestlers in the welterweight division. Somehow, in his rise up the ranks, and maybe this is a good bit of matchmaking, he has avoided a lot of those power wrestlers. That's still a question we don't really know. Maybe that's a hole in his game. Maybe it's not.
It's always a process of revelation. Like you see these guys. Like we did in Conor McGregor. You saw him coming up. Well, he didn't have a face for it. He faces a wrestler, but it's on short nose. You can put asterisks on just about all of this, or you can squint and see it. This is our moment for him, because we have not seen him in that situation.
Yeah, and that's Tyron Woodley at this point. When you talk about him, you talk about his intelligence, right? Like he is a game planner through and through. He has that power wrestling game in his back pocket. He just doesn't use it over the past several years. Do you think this is a two-part question, I guess. Do you think this is a situation where we see him pull it out right now? And also just generally, what do you see as the path to victory for both guys? How do you see this fight playing out?
Because he's a smart fighter. And he's also a little bait and switch artist, man, because he'll tell you one thing and then he'll go to do something else. He plays mind games both in the cage and when he goes, beforehand. We've seen him do that quite a bit. On Wednesday night when he was talking in his little scrum, the media scrum after the open workouts, he'd asked, somebody had pointed this out, and he said, when was the last time you saw me wrestle? What, come on, and he pointed this out, and to me, that was just like this little thing you store away, because you're like, okay, now he's kind of directing traffic, like it's trying to get the mind off of the fact that he might wrestle, and you think his easiest, or I don't know if the easiest, the smartest path to victory might be to break out that singlet a little bit and put Till into situations where he is getting taxed right away. He is forced to survive rather than to thrive. Just be on the defensive rather than the offensive. And I think Woodley has the capability of doing that. I think he would be somewhat foolish not to explore that in the case. So I do think we're going to see him wrestle a little bit in this one.
So who you picking? That's what we do on this show. Who you picking and how?
I went back and forth on this, and I know I don't like to waffle, but ultimately when it comes down to it, I look at the intangibles. I really do. A guy like Till. And just being the size he is and being where he's at in his game with the experience level he's had in his biggest moment, I think he's going to find a way to get it done, man. I think I don't know if he's going to get it. It might be a situation where it happens maybe in the mid rounds, where where he just is able to finally connect on something and put Woodley in a bad situation and get it like a TKO. So if I'm taking the wildest guess, that's where I'm going to put it. Something maybe like a TKO in the mid rounds for Till.
So you take Ann New. I'm going to go ahead and pick Tyron Woodley. I think it's going to be Ann Still. I think he's too smart.
I'll say that afterwards. I'll be like, I had Woodley the whole way.
Oh, it's on record. You can't go back now. I'm taking Tyron Woodley. Let's move on to the co-main event. The new co-main event, really. It wasn't supposed to be. But at this point, I mean, even in the lead up to this fight, this was, in my mind, the most important fight that wasn't a title fight leading into this card. I'm talking, of course, about Jessica Andrade versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz, the strawweight fight. And in my mind, this really is a true old-fashioned number one contender fight through and through. We really don't get these a lot these days, where it's one, regardless of who wins, that next person should be fighting for the title next. I guess, first off, do you agree with my assessment? In your mind, is this a number one contender fight for that 115-pound title?
Well, if anybody benefited from this other co-main falling off in a big spot to be a co-main, it might be this fight, because we didn't understand the stakes. We still don't truly understand if that's what's in play. That seems to be the inference. Like we both can look at it and be like, this should be our number one contender. But we've seen plenty of situations where that doesn't work out. I think putting this into that spotlight, now in the co-main event, it kind of forces the hand a little bit to put a little bit more emphasis, a little bit more gravity behind it, that probably should parlay into a title shot. It's just, I think, just by dint of where it's at. So, given now, going back to what your original question, like those two coming together and fighting, both of them carrying really nice momentum into this fight. Andrade coming off of a couple of just really, really good. I mean,
the Claudia Gadelha fight. What can you say about that?
Who does that to Claudia Gadelha? You know, it's like it's these type of things like you see her perform like that, and of course, Carolina is the last person to beat Rose Namajunas. So if she's able to somehow get this done and do it emphatically, you think it would almost be like Rose would be challenging her. And to me, I love that kind of backstory and psychological interplay when you can get a rematch that has a whole different angle to it. That could work. But honestly, man, either one of them in a title fight next, I could totally see it, especially if they have a very good fight here in Dallas. And one of them is able to just get it done in a way that raises everybody's eyebrows. I could see that happening for sure.
Well, both of them have very interesting narratives driving their chase for the title at this point. Like you said, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, 2016, she defeated Rose Namajunas. It was a split decision, but she is still the last person to defeat Rose. And in my mind,
nice little thing to have in your back pocket.
Exactly,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
And in my mind, Jessica Andrade, she's already the number one contender. There can't be a fight for the title yet because Rose is still injured. What would be a more interesting dynamic for you, outcome for you, if this is a number one contender fight? Would it be that rematch between Carolina and Rose, or would it be Jessica Andrade maybe injecting a new matchup into this?
They're both great. I mean, when I really think about either fight, I'm like, because honestly, both these combatants, both the principals here, Orly Loste and Jacek in the last bit of time, and she's now out of the picture. So now it's like a whole different etch-a-sketch. You look at it and say, okay, what happens in these fights? They're equally intriguing. I guess from the standpoint of just looking at it strictly from a writer's standpoint, where you think, well, what are the great storylines? I think, getting Carolina back in there for that rematch, but coming at it obviously from a whole different perspective. This time she's going for a belt against a person she beat, split decision, close fight, good fight. And I went back and watched that fight not that long ago, and it's a good fight. I think that would have the most storylines coming out of it. It would have the bigger feel to it, I think. So I guess I would lean that direction. But honestly, man, if it's Andrade and she somehow does something tomorrow night to separate herself and make her the obvious number one, I have no problem with that.
Yeah, well, hey, let's make these picks. Andrade, they're two very different styles. Andrade is very much a bully, this very powerful fighter at 115 pounds. Karolina Kowalkiewicz, she's more of a striker, stays on the outside. Yeah. Who do you think takes it and how?
Man, being the bully that she is, like she just being such a pressure fighter and just getting in people's faces, I have a hard time picking against Andrade right now. Yeah. I just think that just the way she has looked in the last couple of fights and just her demeanor, I just think she's right there where she wants to be. She's very motivated. I'm going to go with her. I think it'd probably go the distance because Valentina is very, very tough. I'm not Valentina. I keep doing
Carolina.
She's very, very tough. I think she's not going to go easily into that good night, but I don't think she's going to be able to hang for the whole course of that fight and last and get her arm raised. So I'm going to go Andrade.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I'm going Andrade as well. Let's move on to the rest of the main card.
All right.
Zabit Magomedsharipov. What can you say about this? This is a featherweight fight that lost a little bit of juice last week with the departure of Yair Rodriguez. I was really looking forward to that fight. Unfortunately, we're not going to get it. He's out with an injury. In steps Brandon Davis, taking this opportunity on 2 weeks' notice. That's a difficult task on 2 weeks' notice, my friend.
Hey, man, kudos to him for doing it,
Exactly, right? That's just not many people are stepping up to take that fight. John Lineker excluded because he's a crazy man. Yeah. But hey, first off, with Zabit Magomedsharipov, it feels like when people talk about him right now, they are really talking about him as this future title contender, this future potential star at 145 pounds. Do you feel like when you hear his name and you see him, do you feel like that hype is overblown or is it justified? Is that what you see as well?
I mean, so far it's been justified. I mean, he's looked incrementally better in his way. He has had 3 fights so far, and I thought he's looked better, more compelling. You start to see a broader range of what he's capable of in there, man. I mean, he's a dynamic fighter, and he's very awkwardly built. I mean, he's just
incredibly tall for that weight division.
I think he's got that coil power, like the sinewy strength where he's able to use and explode a lot more than guys who are just generally lanky. He just has he's packing a lot of power in there. I have seen nothing yet to make me think he's got a lot of weaknesses. So I'm like, you watch something like this and you think, well, the biggest drama to me is a guy who has nothing to lose goes into it and he takes this fight and he says, hey, why wouldn't I fight Zabit in a main card, like this? And he swings for the fences. You never know in that situation. Every now and again, you see a guy like that have his day, and that's the only big fear I would have in this fight. But I tell you what, Zabit doesn't strike me as a guy who's very content with where he's at. He doesn't seem to be buying into his own hype. Maybe he's honing it a little bit, like he's learning to distribute his charisma in a weird way, because I feel like he has
he
it.
has that stoicism.
Yes,
he has that stoicism.
Yeah, you're right. That's what it is. But I don't feel like he's buying. It's not like he's buying his hype. It's not like he thinks it's inevitable. He's going to be great. So he's still a hungry guy. So I just don't see it happening, man. I think he's got this one.
Well, I want to just say a little bit about Brandon Davis really quick.
Go ahead.
This is a Contender Series alum. He is a newcomer to the UFC. This is his first year in the UFC, but he is very tough.
Yeah.
He is very, very durable, and that speaks to what he has done this year already. This is already his 4th fight of 2018. He has one more. If he gets one more in, he ties the record for most fights in a calendar year. A record held by Donald Cerrone, Neil Magny. That's a hell of a first year. But ultimately, I think I agree with you. I think Zabit's going to win. It doesn't feel like he will get thrown off very much by the change of opponent.
I used to love these. Just to throw one last thing in there, I used to love when anybody would do this. But the truth is, in most cases, the guy stepping up is just in over his head in a situation like this. We'll see if that's the case here. It has the feel to me a little bit like, why not? And let's see what happens. And why not can translate into something. We'll see. But I'm with Zabit the whole way on this.
Yeah. Well, hey, the new fight on the pay-per-view, this one got elevated. Jimmie Rivera, John Dodson.
I told you.
You did. You called this. This is an important fight, so it's good that it's on the pay-per-view, frankly. It's an important fight for 135. How do you see it going down?
Well, I mean, this is a toughie because I think a guy like Jimmie Rivera, he's lost for the first time in a decade.
Badly.
And it's one of those situations you're like, you just don't know. Like this is, you just have to kind of, you can make it, your hunch might say like, that was just a fluke, or you could say whatever you want about it, but it happened, and you don't know if he's going to show up, being, trepidation, or if he's going to trepidation, or he's going to go in there and let his hands go, or if you don't know if he's like going to fight a little differently. I mean, just anything that he tweaks, we've seen it a million times. There's also a weird thing, guys get knocked out. It becomes a mental thing. They get in trouble in those situations, and they don't overcome it well. One fight becomes a spiral. And I think that that's where we're at on him. I don't think that that's going to happen. He's a mentally tough guy. At least he's shown that much. That to win for a decade, you've got to be. But
sounds like you're leaning Dodson.
I kind of am.
Okay.
I kind of am, man. I don't know. I'm not sure I could give you a scientific reason. It's
got
more
that feeling. You
it's
just have
just
that
the
feeling
that he, this seems like that fight. It's a very tough guy to return to after something like that. And Dodson's packing a lot of power, and he's opportunistic. So I think that he might find a way to get it done.
Boy, I'm going to go the other side of this one. I think I'm going to take Jimmie Rivera. I think he's going to rebound nicely. And last fight on the pay-per-view card is a sneaky good welterweight fight between two very nice prospects, Nico Price and Abdul Razak Al Hassan. Not only good prospects, but huge knockout artists. I mean, early in their UFC careers already, they have littered with knockouts. I mean, Nico Price's last fight maybe will be a knockout of the year candidate. How do you see this going, and why? It really feels as though the winner of this fight maybe will get to the precipice of that top 15 in the welterweight division.
I think that will happen. And I think somebody will emphatically finish the other. I don't think it gets out of the first round.
So who are you picking?
I'm going to go with Nico on this one, man. I mean, he's shown more than just he's a brawler. He's a pretty smart guy. He's a smart fighter, and very energetic too. I like him out of the cage. He's a nice
energy
guy.
for days. Energy for days.
I think that. I think he'll get it done, But it really comes. I mean, honestly, like you could imagine just standing in the wheelhouse and them having a crazy exchange and one of them going down. So it's almost like I feel like a little bit of a coin flip, but I'm going to go with Nico on that one.
I agree with you. I think it's going to be Nico. And before we get out of here, let's take a quick look at the undercard. UFC 228 maybe is not the most stacked card, but there is still a lot to like on this undercard. Little nuggets here and there. Tatiana Suarez versus Carla Esparza, Diego Sanchez, Aljamain Sterling. There's a lot. Little storylines there. So what are one or two fights that you're looking at that maybe are not getting the shine they deserve, but you have an eye on?
I mean, I'm always a sucker for guys who've hung around the game, like Diego Sanchez, as long as he has, and he ends up in a diminishing way, fighting on prelims. There's not a lot of spotlight on him. He's gone through a couple of losses, and you're like, does he continue this? Is this it? Is this the last time we see him in the UFC? Because this guy's been, he might be the longest tenured UFC fighter there is right now. I'm not 100% sure, but he's been fighting in the organization
since 2005.
So that's a long time. But could this be it? So I like that. And, of course, Jim Miller, to me, he's must-see TV. The dude brings it every single time. And he's in a very similar spot. I think that he needs to kind of prove that he's still up to speed to fight some of these guys. And this is a big fight for him as well. So a couple of the veterans, and we've seen a lot of that in the last couple of months, guys who are basically fighting for the roster spots or to see if they want to keep going. And you might see a little bit of desperation from the veterans in this one a little bit. So I'm intrigued to see what both those guys can do.
Yeah, well, I'm keeping my eye on Tatiana Suarez versus Carla Esparza. I think Tatiana Suarez is a future title contender, if not champion, in that 115-pound division. But in the meantime, that is it for us. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the UFC 228 preview show. For me, Shaun Al-Shatti, Chuck Mindenhall, thank you so much for not only watching this, but all our coverage all week here from Dallas. It has been a fun week, and we will keep it going on Saturday. Keep it locked to MMA Fighting for pre-fight, post-fight, everything in between, all the goodies you've come to expect from MMA Fighting. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching once more, and have fun, enjoy the fights.